Black WWII veteran slapped in a cafe, not knowing his son led Allied intelligence. You need to leave now, we don't serve your kind here. I served this country for 4 years in Europe. I have every right to sit in this cafe. The slap came so fast that the entire cafe fell silent. James Morrison's head snapped to the side, his weathered cheek stinging from the blow. The coffee cup he'd been holding clattered against the saucer. He was 72 years old, and in all his years, through the battlefields of France, through the Jim Crow South, through decades of quiet dignity, no one had ever struck him in public like this. Harold Bennett stood over him, his face red with rage, his hand still raised. I said get out. I don't care what you did in some war. This is my establishment, and I won't have you disrupting my customers. The other patrons stared. Some looked away. A young waitress named Sarah stood frozen by the kitchen door, her order pad trembling in her hands. An elderly white couple in the corner booth stopped eating. A businessman reading the newspaper slowly lowered it, his eyes wide. James Morrison sat perfectly still, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the cafe owner. He had faced German machine gun nests. He had survived the Battle of the Bulge. He would not give this man the satisfaction of seeing him react. What Harold Bennett didn't know, what no one in that cafe could possibly have known, was that the disruptive old man he just struck was the father of Lieutenant Colonel David Morrison, the intelligence officer who had coordinated crucial counterintelligence operations during the final months of World War II. The same David Morrison whose classified work had saved thousands of Allied lives and helped turn the tide in the European theater. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when James Morrison had received a phone call that would change everything. The morning had begun quietly in James's small house on Elm Street. It was April 15th, 1968, and the spring air carried the scent of magnolias through the open kitchen window. James had been a widower for 2 years now, since his beloved wife Dorothy passed. He kept the house exactly as she'd left it, the floral curtains she'd sewn herself, the porcelain figures on the mantel, the photographs covering every available surface. Most of those photographs were of his son, David. David in his high school graduation robes, David in his army uniform, David shaking hands with what looked like important men in suits, though the details were always vague. David had been career military, following in his father's footsteps, but his work had taken him places James never quite understood. Intelligence work, Dad, David would say during his rare visits. Can't talk much about it, you know how it is. James understood. He'd had his own secrets from the war, things he'd never told Dorothy, things he sometimes still saw in his dreams. The phone rang at 9:47 in the morning. James remembered the exact time because he'd been watching the clock, waiting for his neighbor Mrs. Chen to arrive for their weekly chess game. Is this Mr. James Morrison? A crisp, professional voice. Male, young, speaking. Mr. Morrison, this is Captain William Reeves calling from the Pentagon. I'm calling about your son, Lieutenant Colonel David Morrison. James's heart stopped. Every parent knows that feeling, the moment when an official voice on the phone makes the world tilt sideways. Is David. Your son is fine, sir. I apologize for alarming you. I'm actually calling with good news. Your son is being awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for his intelligence work during World War II. The award was classified for 23 years, but the files have just been declassified. There will be a ceremony in Washington next month, and we'd very much like you to attend. James sat down heavily in the kitchen chair. I don't understand. David was in intelligence, yes, but he never said, your son led a team that infiltrated German communications networks in 1944 and 1945. His work provided crucial intelligence that helped Allied forces anticipate German movements during the final push into Germany. General Eisenhower himself commended his service, sir. We're talking about operations that saved thousands of lives. After the call ended, James sat in his kitchen for a long time, staring at a photograph of David in his uniform taken in 1943. His son had been 21 years old then, fresh-faced and serious. James had been so proud when David enlisted, following his father's path, but he'd never imagined the enormity of it settled over him like a warm blanket. His son, his David, a hero in ways James had never known. He needed to get out of the house. He needed to walk to think, to let this news settle into his bones. He put on his hat, the same brown fedora he'd worn for 15 years, and his jacket with his small American Legion pin on the lapel, and he headed downtown. That's when he decided to stop at Bennett's Café. He'd never been to Bennett's before. It had opened 2 years ago, and Dorothy had wanted to try it, but James had heard things, whispers in the neighborhood. Bennett doesn't care for colored folks, old Mr. Jackson had mentioned once. Serves them but makes them feel unwelcome. But today, with the news about David singing in his heart, James felt different. He felt like a man whose son had saved thousands of lives deserved to sit anywhere he damn well pleased and have a cup of coffee. The cafe was half full when he walked in at 10:30 a.m. It was a nice establishment, red vinyl booths, a long counter with chrome stools, black and white checkered floor. The smell of fresh coffee and bacon filled the air. A jukebox in the corner played something soft and instrumental. James took a seat at the counter. The waitress, Sarah, according to her name tag, approached with a careful smile. "Coffee, please," James said politely. "Black." She nodded and turned to fetch the pot. That's when Harold Bennett emerged from the kitchen. Bennett was a thick-set man in his 50s with slick-back hair and a permanent scowl. He'd served in Korea, or so the local paper had mentioned when the cafe opened, and he ran his establishment with military precision. He noticed James immediately. "Sarah," he called out sharply, "I'll handle this." The young waitress froze, the coffee pot in her hand. Bennett approached James with heavy steps. "Can I help you?" "Just having some coffee," James replied evenly. "Your waitress was about to serve me." "I'm sure there are other establishments that would be more suitable for you." The cafe had gone quiet. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks stopped moving. James kept his voice level. "I'd like a cup of coffee, please. I can pay. This isn't about money." Bennett's voice was rising. "This is about maintaining a certain standard in my establishment. My regular customers expect—" "Your regular customers expect what exactly?" James interrupted, his patience beginning to fray. "I'm a veteran. I fought for this country. I'm a taxpayer. I'm a citizen. I have every right to sit at this counter and order a cup of coffee. You need to leave now. We don't serve your kind here. I served this country for 4 years in Europe. I have every right to sit in this cafe." And that's when Harold Bennett slapped him. The crack of flesh on flesh echoed through the cafe like a gunshot. James's head snapped to the side. The world seemed to slow down. Could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the sting spreading across his cheek, could sense every eye in the cafe fixed on him. Slowly, very slowly, James turned his head back to face Bennett. His eyes were hard as flint. "You just assaulted me," James said quietly, "in front of a dozen witnesses. And I'll do it again if you don't get out of my cafe." Sarah, the waitress, found her voice. "Mr. Bennett, please, I don't think—" "Be quiet, Sarah. This doesn't concern you." But it did concern her. It concerned everyone in that cafe. The elderly couple in the corner booth, the businessman with his newspaper, the young mother with her toddler, the construction workers at the far end of the counter. They had all just witnessed something that would haunt them. James stood up slowly. He was 6 feet tall, still straight-backed despite his 72 years. He looked Harold Bennett in the eye. "I'm not leaving," he said, "and you're going to regret what you just did." Bennett's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "Are you threatening me in my own establishment?" "No threat, just a fact." The door to the cafe opened with a jingle of bells. A police officer walked in, Officer Tom Hendricks, making his usual morning rounds. He took in the scene immediately, the tense standoff, the silent customers, the red mark blooming on James's cheek. "What's going on here, Harold?" Bennett turned to the officer with relief. "This man is trespassing and causing a disturbance. I've asked him to leave, and he's refusing." Officer Hendricks looked at James, then back at Bennett. Hendricks was young, maybe 30, and he had a reputation as a fair man. "Mr. Morrison, is that you?" James nodded. He and Officer Hendricks knew each other from the neighborhood. Hendricks sometimes stopped by the house to check on James, especially after Dorothy passed. "What happened to your face?" "Mr. Bennett struck me when I refused to leave after ordering coffee." The cafe erupted in murmurs. This was different from asking someone to leave. This was assault. Hendricks's expression hardened. "Harold, is that true? He was being disrespectful and refusing to leave my private establishment. Did you strike him?" Bennett hesitated. He seemed to realize for the first time that he might have crossed a line. I was defending my property rights. That's not what I asked. Did you strike Mr. Morrison?" The silence stretched out. Finally, Bennett muttered he wouldn't leave. "That's assault, Harold." Hendricks turned to James. "Mr. Morrison, do you want to press charges? What happened? Could I use your telephone, Alina? I need to make a long-distance call." 20 minutes later, after navigating through several military operators, James heard his son's voice on the line. "Dad, is everything okay? They said it was urgent." James told him everything, the call from the Pentagon, the cafe, the slap. He kept his voice steady, factual, the way he'd learned to report events during the war. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Dad," David finally said, his voice tight with controlled fury, "give me the address of that cafe." "Son, I don't want you to—" "The address, Dad, please." James gave it to him. I'm in Washington right now, but I can be there by tomorrow morning. Don't do anything. Don't press charges yet. Just let me handle this. David, you don't need to, Dad. His son's voice was firm. You taught me that you stand up for what's right. You taught me that you defend the people you love. And you taught me that dignity matters. Someone just struck my father who stormed Omaha Beach, who survived the bulge, who came home and raised me and never complained, never asked for recognition, never demanded the respect he deserved. So yes, I do need to handle this. I'll be there tomorrow. The call ended. James sat in the library's small phone booth for a long moment, his hands shaking slightly. Not from fear or anger, but from something else. Pride, perhaps, or love, or the sudden overwhelming sense that the boy he'd raised had become a man who would move heaven and earth to defend him. That night, James barely slept. He kept replaying the moment of the slap, kept feeling the sting, kept seeing the faces of the other customers. Some had looked away. But some, like Sarah the waitress, like the elderly couple, had looked horrified. Witnesses to an injustice they couldn't quite believe. He thought about all the times he'd swallowed his pride, all the times he'd walked past whites-only signs without comment, all the times he'd taken the long way around to avoid confrontation. He'd done it to survive. He'd done it for Dorothy, for David, for the quiet life they'd built together. But David was right. Dignity mattered. The next morning at 9:00 a.m., a military staff car pulled up in front of Bennett's Café. It was a gleaming black sedan with small flags on the front, flags that indicated the passenger was a high-ranking military officer. Lieutenant Colonel David Morrison stepped out. He was 46 years old, tall like his father, with the same straight posture and careful eyes. He wore his full dress uniform, every ribbon and medal precisely placed. The Distinguished Service Medal the Pentagon had called about wasn't there yet. That ceremony was still weeks away, but his chest carried enough other decorations to tell a story of service and sacrifice. James stood on the sidewalk across the street watching. He tried to talk David out of coming, but his son had been adamant. "I'm coming, Dad. That's final." David entered the cafe. Through the large front windows, James could see the reaction. Conversations stopped. People stared at the uniform, at the rank insignia, at the medals. David walked straight to the counter and spoke to Sarah, the waitress. "Is Harold Bennett here?" "Yes, sir. He's in the back. I'll get him." "Thank you." Bennett emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He saw the uniform and his expression shifted. Military men respected military men, even in 1968. "Can I help you, Colonel? Are you Harold Bennett, owner of this establishment?" "I am." "Yesterday you struck my father, James Morrison. He was sitting at this counter and you slapped him across the face. Is that correct?" The cafe went deathly silent. Bennett's face paled, then flushed. "Now wait just a minute. Is that correct?" David's voice was like steel. This was the voice that had commanded men in combat, that had interrogated German prisoners, that had coordinated operations affecting thousands of lives. "Your father there was a situation. My father is a decorated World War II veteran. He served in the 320th Infantry Regiment. He landed at Omaha Beach on D-Day. He fought through France and Belgium. He survived the Battle of the Bulge. He earned a Bronze Star for valor. And yesterday in your cafe, you struck him for the crime of wanting a cup of coffee." Every word landed like a hammer blow. The other customers stared. Sarah, the waitress, had tears in her eyes. David continued, his voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. "I am also a veteran, Mr. Bennett. I served in military intelligence during the war and continued to serve afterward. My work, which was classified until last week, involved coordinating counterintelligence operations that saved thousands of Allied lives. General Eisenhower personally commended my service. Next month, I will receive the Distinguished Service Medal from the Secretary of the Army." He stepped closer to Bennett. "But none of that, none of my medals, none of my rank, none of my service, none of it matters as much as this. That man you struck yesterday is my father. He is the man who taught me what honor means, what dignity means, what service means, and you put your hands on him because of the color of his skin." Bennett was backing up now, his face white. "I didn't know, you didn't know what? That he was a veteran, that he was a father. That he was a human being deserving of basic respect. What exactly didn't you know, Mr. Bennett?" The businessman from yesterday had returned for his morning coffee. He stood up now. "I was here yesterday. I saw what happened. The colored gentleman, Mr. Morrison, he was polite. He just wanted coffee. Mr. Bennett, you were out of line." The elderly couple from the corner booth were also back. The old man cleared his throat. "My wife and I were also here. We've been coming to this cafe for 2 years, Harold. We've never said anything before about how you treat certain customers, but what we saw yesterday, that was wrong, just wrong." Sarah, the waitress, spoke up, her voice shaking but determined. Mr. Morrison is always polite when he comes into town. He tips well. He says please and thank you. He didn't deserve what you did." David looked around the cafe. "My father chose not to press charges yesterday. He was being generous. But I'm not here to let you off the hook, Mr. Bennett. I'm here to make you understand something." He pulled a folded document from his jacket. "This is a letter. I've sent copies to the mayor, to the chief of police, to the local chapter of the NAACP, and to the newspaper. It details exactly what happened in this cafe yesterday with a full list of witnesses. It explains who my father is, what he's done for this country, and how you treated him." Bennett's hands were shaking. "You're trying to destroy my business." "No, sir. You did that yourself the moment you raised your hand to my father. I'm simply making sure people know what kind of man runs this establishment. They can decide for themselves whether they want to continue patronizing it." David turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. My father fought against fascism in Europe. He fought against men who believed in racial superiority, who believed that some people were worth less than others. He risked his life to stop that ideology, and he came home to a country where he still couldn't sit at a lunch counter in peace. Think about that, Mr. Bennett. Think about what that means." He walked out of the cafe. James met him on the sidewalk, and father and son embraced. "You didn't have to do that," James said quietly. "Yes, I did, for you, for Mom, for every veteran who came home to this." They walked together to James's house. Over coffee that James brewed in his own kitchen, in the house where he'd raised David, where Dorothy's presence still lingered in every corner, they talked. David told his father things he'd never been able to say during the war. About the fear, the responsibility, the weight of knowing that his intelligence work meant life or death for soldiers he'd never meet. About the German communications network his team had cracked in late 1944, the one that had given Allied commanders crucial insights into German troop movements. About the night in December 1944, when his intelligence had warned of the German offensive that would become the Battle of the Bulge, warning that had saved thousands of lives, even though it couldn't prevent the battle itself. "We knew they were coming," David said quietly. "Not exactly where or when, but we knew. We got the intelligence to the right people. It wasn't enough to stop the offensive, but it was enough to prepare for it. They tell me thousands of soldiers survived because we weren't caught completely by surprise." James listened, his coffee growing cold in his hands. His son, his David, the boy who'd followed him into service, who'd found his own way to fight, his own way to save lives. "I never knew," James whispered. "You never said. It was classified. I couldn't." "But Dad," David reached across the table and took his father's hand. "I learned it from you. The way you talked about the war, the few times you'd talk about it. You never bragged. You never made yourself the hero. You just did what needed to be done. That's what I tried to do too." Over the next few days, the story of what happened at Bennett's Café spread through the town like wildfire. The newspaper ran a front-page article. "Decorated veteran assaulted at local café, son's service record revealed." It detailed both James's and David's military service, including the newly declassified information about David's intelligence work. The response was swift and decisive. The mayor issued a public statement condemning Bennett's actions. The local veterans' organizations, even ones that had never accepted black members, sent letters of apology to James. The chief of police announced that the department would be reviewing its policies on handling discrimination complaints. And Bennett's Café began to empty. Customers stopped coming. The construction workers found another place for their morning coffee. The businessman took his newspaper to a different restaurant. The elderly couple, who had been regulars for 2 years, wrote a letter to the editor explaining why they could no longer support an establishment that treated veterans with such disrespect. Sarah, the waitress, quit. In her resignation letter, which she also sent to the newspaper, she wrote, "I cannot in good conscience work for a man who would strike a war hero for wanting a cup of coffee. Mr. Morrison deserved better. All customers deserve better." 2 weeks after the incident, Harold Bennett stood in his nearly empty cafe. The lunch rush that usually filled every booth and stool had produced exactly 3 customers. His receipts were down 70%. His reputation was destroyed. He picked up the phone and called the number David Morrison had left with him. "Colonel Morrison, this is Harold Bennett. I need to speak with your father and with you if you're willing." The meeting took place at James's house, neutral ground. Officer Hendricks was there as a witness. So was Pastor Williams from James's church and Mrs. Patterson from the library. David had insisted on witnesses, on making sure this conversation was documented. Bennett looked terrible. He'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. He sat in James's living room, surrounded by photographs of the man he'd wronged, and he could barely meet anyone's eyes. Mr. Morrison, he began, his voice hoarse. There's no excuse for what I did. None. I was raised a certain way with certain beliefs, and I never questioned them. I thought I was protecting something, my business, my customers, some idea of how things should be. But I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. James sat across from him, his face impassive. He'd heard apologies before. Words were easy. Bennett continued. I served in Korea. I fought alongside black soldiers, colored soldiers, whatever term you prefer. I fought alongside them, saw them bleed, saw them die. And when we came home, I somehow forgot that. I forgot that we were all soldiers, all veterans, all Americans. I let my prejudices become more important than my principles. He looked up at James now, tears in his eyes. What I did to you, striking you, that was unforgivable. You came to my cafe as a customer, as a veteran, as a human being, and I treated you as less than dirt. Your son's letter made me realize something. You fought the same war I did, just different battles. You put your life on the line for this country, and I repaid that service with violence and hatred. David spoke up. Mr. Bennett, my father is the one you wronged. He's the one who gets to decide if your apology means anything. All eyes turned to James. He sat quietly for a long moment, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes distant. He was thinking about Omaha Beach, about the sound of bullets cutting through the air, about the friends who'd fallen beside him. He was thinking about coming home to a country that still saw him as less than. About Dorothy, who'd taught him that anger could be justified but shouldn't consume you. About David, who'd learned to fight in his own way. Mr. Bennett, James said finally, I accept your apology, but accepting it doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means acknowledging that people can change if they choose to. The question is, what are you going to do now? Bennett wiped his eyes. I've been thinking about that. I want to make this right, or as right as I can. I'm proposing the following. First, I will issue a public apology in the newspaper, acknowledging what I did and why it was wrong. Second, I will establish a scholarship fund for black veterans and their children, funded from the profits of my cafe. Third, I will never discriminate against any customer based on their race, and I will fire any employee who does. He pulled out a document. I've had my lawyer draw this up. It's a binding commitment. If I violate any of these terms, I will sell the cafe and donate the proceeds to the NAACP. Pastor Williams leaned forward. That's a start, Mr. Bennett, but words and money aren't enough. You need to change in here. He tapped his chest. In your heart. I know, Bennett whispered. I know. James stood up. Everyone in the room held their breath. He walked over to where Bennett sat and extended his hand. Then let's see if you can do it. Bennett stood, took James's hand, and shook it. His grip was firm, his eyes finally meeting James's. Thank you, Bennett said. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but thank you. Forgiveness isn't about deserving, James replied. It's about choosing not to let hate win. The story of James Morrison and Harold Bennett became something of a legend in that small town. Bennett did everything he'd promised. The newspaper apology ran the following week, full page, paid for by Bennett himself. The scholarship fund was established with an initial donation of $5,000, more than Bennett could really afford, but he found a way. And the cafe changed. Bennett personally invited James to be his first customer after the apology ran. James came, David at his side, and ordered coffee. This time, Bennett himself served it on the house with a trembling hand. Your money's no good here, Mr. Morrison. Not today, not ever. I'll pay for my coffee, Mr. Bennett, same as anyone else. That's equality. Bennett nodded, understanding. Then at least let me get you a piece of pie. Sarah's, my new waitress, Annie, makes the best apple pie in 3 counties. Over time, Bennett's Cafe became known as a place where everyone was welcome. Bennett didn't just stop discriminating. He became an active advocate for integration. When other business owners grumbled about the Civil Rights Act of 1968, Bennett was the one who stood up at the Chamber of Commerce meeting and said, I learned the hard way that hate destroys everything it touches. Don't make my mistake. A month later, David received his Distinguished Service Medal in a ceremony in Washington. D.C. James was there, sitting in the front row, wearing his own medals from World War II. When David crossed the stage and the Secretary of the Army pinned the medal to his chest, James felt tears running down his face. After the ceremony, a general approached James. Mr. Morrison, I'm General Patterson. I served with your son in the Intelligence Corps. I wanted to tell you personally, your son saved my life. His intelligence work in early 1945 warned us of a German counteroffensive near my position. We were able to prepare to call in reinforcements. Without that warning, my entire regiment might have been wiped out. James shook the general's hand, unable to speak. The general continued, Your son told me what happened at that cafe. He told me how you responded with dignity, with restraint, with wisdom. Sir, you raised an extraordinary man. But then again, extraordinary men usually learn it from their fathers. That evening, David and James sat together in James's hotel room, looking out over the lights of Washington. "Dad," David said quietly, "thank you." "For what?" "For showing me how to fight without losing yourself. For teaching me that strength isn't about physical power, it's about moral courage. For being the kind of man worth defending." James smiled, his eyes misty. "You know what your mother would say right now?" "What?" "She'd say, stop all this serious talk and get your old father something to eat. All these fancy ceremonies don't fill a stomach." They both laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet room. "She'd be proud of you," James said. "So proud. She'd be proud of both of us." They went to dinner at a small restaurant near the hotel. As they ate, they talked about everything and nothing, memories of Dorothy, plans for the future, the changing world around them. James told stories from D-Day that he'd never shared before. David talked about the intelligence work he could finally discuss, now that it was declassified. And as they talked, James realized something. The slap at Bennett's Café had been meant to diminish him, to put him in what Harold Bennett saw as his place. Instead, it had revealed something Bennett had never expected. That dignity cannot be destroyed by violence, that service leaves a legacy, and that a father's greatest victory is seeing his son become a better man than he ever was. 3 months later, Bennett's Café hosted its first integrated community dinner. The proceeds went to the scholarship fund Bennett had established. James Morrison was the guest of honor. Harold Bennett stood at the microphone in front of a room full of black and white residents eating together, and he told the truth about what he'd done and why he was working to change. "I was wrong," he said simply, "and I'm spending the rest of my life proving that people can be better than their worst moments." When Bennett finished speaking, James stood and walked to the front of the room. The crowd fell silent. "Mr. Bennett and I will never be friends," James said clearly. "Too much has happened for that, but we can be something more important. We can be witnesses to change. We can show that even the deepest wrongs can lead to growth if we're willing to do the hard work of transformation." He looked around the room. "I fought in World War II to stop tyranny. My son worked in intelligence to save lives. We both served because we believed in America's promise, not its reality, but its promise. That promise is simple. All men are created equal. We're not there yet. We might never fully get there. But nights like this, when we sit together, eat together, work together towards something better, this is how we keep the promise alive." The applause was thunderous. Sarah, the former waitress who had quit in protest, was there too. She'd started her own small restaurant across town, one that had been integrated from day one. She approached James during the dinner. "Mr. Morrison, I never thanked you properly for your dignity that day, for showing me what real courage looks like. I've been working at that cafe for 6 months, watching Mr. Bennett treat certain customers poorly, and I never said anything. I was afraid. But watching you refusing to be diminished, refusing to accept injustice, it changed me. I quit the next day because you showed me I could." James smiled at her. "You did that yourself, Sarah. You found your own courage." "Maybe, but you lit the match." As the evening wound down, David found his father standing outside the cafe, looking up at the stars. "You okay, Dad?" "Better than okay. I was just thinking about your mother, about how she always said that one person's courage could change a whole community. I never quite believed her, but maybe she was right." She usually was. They stood together in comfortable silence, father and son, two veterans of different wars, both still fighting for the same thing, a country that lived up to its ideals. "Dad," David said after a while, "when I got that call from you when you told me what Bennett had done, I was so angry. I wanted to destroy him. But you showed me something better. You showed me that justice isn't about revenge. It's about transformation." James nodded. "I spent my whole life being angry, son. Angry at how I was treated, at the injustices I saw, at a country that asked me to die for freedoms it wouldn't give me. And that anger was justified. But I learned something from your mother. She said, 'Anger is like a fire. It can warm you on cold nights, but if you let it consume you, it burns everything down.' I decided a long time ago not to let it consume me. Even when Bennett hit you. Even then, especially then. Because in that moment I had a choice. I could let his hate define me, or I could refuse to play the role he wanted me to play. I could be the angry black man he expected, or I could be the dignified veteran I've always tried to be. Dorothy would have wanted me to choose dignity. She would have been proud. So would all the men who didn't make it home from the war. The ones who died on those beaches, in those forests. They died believing in something better. I owe it to them to keep believing too." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. The same stars that had shone over Omaha Beach, over the Ardennes forest, over all the battlefields where James and men like him had fought. The same stars that had watched David work late into the night, decoding German messages, coordinating intelligence that would save thousands of lives. The same stars that now look down on a small cafe in a small town, where people of different races sat together, ate together, and proved that change was possible. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.